lack of civil rights enforcement is negatively impacting American society. What are civil rights and why are they important? So the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this act, President Lyndon Johnson created on July 2nd, 1964, prohibited discrimination in public places, provided the integration of schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal. The anti-discrimination laws prohibit discrimination between sex, age, race, ethnicity, nationality, disability, mental illness, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity expressions, sex characteristics, religions, creed, or individual political opinions against discrimination in the workplace and public.
Overall solution. If we teach more about civil rights and its enforcement, then we can better enforce them ourselves. A limitation would be that the cost of textbooks and programs could definitely take a toll on schools depending on how wealthy they are. Although schools already teach this, they don't go so much in depth in enforcement. On the other hand, when adding this unit, it could very well change the way that we are able to enforce those laws. And we've changed the curriculum. However, it wouldn't fully change because of the fact that it would just be a separate unit added to a government class or some kind of history class. And there would be no time frame on it, considering that each teacher teaches at a different rate. 37% of Americans say that they cannot name one of the five rights guaranteed by the First Amendment. This shows that the education of civil rights is lacking, and we need to definitely get it done to the point where we are better educated to enforce our civil rights.
Now, what are civil rights and anti-discrimination laws? Well, like my colleague Lily said, they are laws that prohibit the discrimination against any group or any minority group based on race or color, sex including pregnancy, age of 50 or older, 40 or older, national origin, religion, disability, genetic information, and not mentioned on here, sexual orientation. Now, the government plays a huge part in enforcing these laws and protecting individual rights. A good example of this is the 2015 same-sex equality law, where basically, before this law, many same-sex couples could not get married due to the fact that the religious and governmental sector are so closely knit in the institution of marriage. But because of the 2015 law, these couples could now have one of the basic expressions of life, which is marriage. Another example of this are Jim Crow laws of the 1950s and 60s. These laws heavily segregated America and prevented people from simple things like using the same water fountain as their Caucasian counterparts. But because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, these people could actually feel like people and not animals being separated from other people. A counter-argument, though, is that these laws limit free speech and their First Amendment right. And like this quote explains, that these are politically conservative individuals that feel this way. But these laws don't do what they say they are, which is limiting free speech. These laws are protecting people from hate crime or discrimination where it's not needed. These laws are not being used to punish thoughts and beliefs. These are to help prevent harmful acts against these minority groups. As you can see on this graph right here, the green states are states that hate crime laws protect all minority individuals. The yellow protect against all minority individuals excluding a few, and the brown has no hate crime laws. While there is a good portion of states in green, as America, who prides itself on being a country of freedom and equality, we need all of these to be green to fully own that name. A solution to this is to simply make voices heard and be more politically active. Get change done with support. In 2016, Ohio experienced a voting crisis where a good portion of the African American population was not voting because they simply could not get to the polls or felt like their voices were not being heard enough, so why bother? Like Allison proposed, educating young people on enforcement of laws could help the future generation learn how their voices do matter. there is a counter argument though that people are already talking, but in the government, some people just choose not to listen, which no one can control. But if we make our voices so loud, someday they just can't ignore it.
As my colleague talked about, there are a lot of laws in the political, and there also are some in the economical against discrimination. In a Washington Post article, they talked about the Supreme Court, and they talked about a law brought back up, which was the 1968 Fair Housing Act. They talked about how it still is, it prevents more than just intentional discrimination in the housing market, but that law was passed 4 years after the original desegregation law, which stopped the segregation of blacks and whites, but it took 4 years for them to care how much they're making when they sell their house, which is a problem, and it continues to be a problem in 2018 and 2019 because they're not enforced. Because they're not enforced, people are still losing their wealth, and that's unethical. And my colleague really is going to talk about how that unethicality affects the issue.
While our government and society has improved, they still both lack a strong backbone to support the continuous change that's demanded with time. Women's rights over the years have gone up and down, starting back in nomadic times where they were egalitarian, and have gone through development of religion and societies. They've elevated and de-elevated. But now, in the workplace, if a man is making more than a woman at the same job doing the same work, she can take that man to court, or take her boss to court, and not only get compensated for the time that she lost when working there, but also raise her paycheck and continue to make what she should be making. As in an article by Christina Hoffman, she talks about it. She's a specialist in ethics. But there are still laws that aren't being held up, like with the Fair Housing Act now, and how people are still not making as much as they should on their houses, and Maddie's going to go into that.
So, as Lily talked about the unethicality, there was a comedian, his name is Dion Dooley, and he's always talked about racist problems in the past in this community, and he bought a brand new house, and he improved on the house to build up his investment. When it came time to sell the house, his manager told him, take down the pictures of your family and take down the pictures of yourself. The appraiser will appraise your house lower than it should be. The appraiser appraised the house so low that the bank thought it was foreclosed. The fair market value of the house was $150,000. That was $125,000 less than the appraiser wanted to give him, just because he was black. That was the only reason the appraiser gave. This shows that even though those laws are in place, because they don't get enforced, people are losing their real wealth. And that brings them down in the American society, which makes their life even harder. And that's going to bring us into the social and cultural ones.
As mentioned before, African American men are receiving lots of injustice. African American men are receiving 20% longer sentences, typically, than that of a Caucasian man. This is by the USSC. This gap is due to the fact that judges have more freedom in the way that they sentence, and there's no rule or law that they have to go off of. By going off of this chart by criminal history and offense level, this would totally eliminate the gap. This would make African American and Caucasian men equal. Equip by GLAD, who is a nonprofit organization and supports the LGBTQ community, says that discrimination has jumped 11%. This is injustice due to the fact that this goes against the Civil Rights Act of 1964, saying that you cannot discriminate by one's sex. This also goes against the Equality Act of 2010. When someone's rights have been violated, they can go to court. However, it's costly, and oftentimes they lose. This is why no one chooses to really go to court. Discrimination could also be the byproduct of discomfort. Oftentimes, this happens in a community bathroom when a member of the LGBTQ community is with a just regular person of the community. Then both parties feel uncomfortable, but by supplying gender-neutral bathrooms as well as family bathrooms, they both parties can feel equal and comfortable. Limitations could be the costs and the extra room might not be available. However, going off of the limitations, this overall would bring lots of acceptance and equality to all people.
In conclusion, knowledge about what is occurring is limited and needs to be addressed by implementing our new idea for a new unit in our government and history classes. The government hasn't been kept as accountable as they should with these civil rights, and that is seen as the rise of discrimination, even though we're supposed to be in the new age where this country is the most accepting. The problem will only get worse if nothing is done, and that's why it is very important now more than ever to make our voices heard and to prevent injustices in the future.
Okay, a few questions for you. Maddie, I'm going to start with you. How did the group decide to include Lily's perspective, lens, and conclusion, conclusion into the overall presentation?
Well, our question, the biggest lens for our question was, the second biggest lens was ethical, which was Lily's lens. Mm-hmm. So that brought in her perspectives, because you can't really explain what the problem with not enforcing civil rights laws is without explaining how it affects the people and what's morally wrong with it.
Okay. Lily, next to you. In the future, what change would you make to your group norms, and how would you expect that to improve your team presentation?
I definitely would change our communication and trying to meet up more, because we all have things outside of school. Like Maddie had her work, Bailey had play practice, and Allison had softball, and I had to babysit. So if we could try to find a more common ground and meet up more, maybe even during school if we could, and that would improve how our presentation came together and our timing.
Okay. Allison, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your team presentation, and why?
Lily had it was Maddie, my apologies. Maddie had something in her economic lens about how it was the solution that we were thinking about using, but we decided to not use because of the fact that she was talking about the fair house market, and she said to do background checks and make sure that the people employed aren't discriminatory, but you can't really check if someone is racist or has tendencies through a background check unless they have committed a crime.
Okay. And then finally, describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion, Bailey.
I thought that Allison's report on the judicial system of how African American males were getting higher time for the same crimes done by Caucasian individuals. I thought that was a very compelling argument that changed my view on the whole situation due to me not knowing the extent of what was actually occurring in our political system in that sense.
Okay, thank you.